I never thought I'd live long enough to fear my own phone ringing, yet here I was, staring at it, hoping it would light up with her name. Deborah, my only daughter. My reason for everything I ever did right and everything I ever did wrong. That night, when it finally rang, my heart fluttered like an old clock that still remembered how to tick. I answered before the first ring could finish. Deborah? Her voice was there, but colder now, restrained, as if she was trying not to sound irritated. Mom, I think it's better if you don't come over this week. Just like that. No explanation. No softness. Just a sentence that landed like a door closing. I didn't ask why. Mothers can tell when asking will only make the wound deeper. So I stayed quiet, whispered, okay, and pretended it didn't hurt. After the call, I sat down on the couch, the same couch she used to curl up on as a little girl when thunderstorms scared her. I used to hold her close and tell her stories about angels who watched over children while they slept. Back then, she'd look up at me with those brown eyes and say, "You're my angel, Mama." It's strange how words can stay in your memory but lose their warmth with time. That night, the words echoed in a house that felt too big for just me. I tried distracting myself, made tea, folded the same blanket 3 times, turned the TV on, then off again. But my hands shook too much to hold the cup steady. Something inside me knew this wasn't just about a week. When Deborah was young, I promised her she'd never feel alone. I kept that promise for decades. When her father left, she was only 7. I remember her tiny fingers gripping my dress as she asked, "Is he coming back?" I told her yes. He didn't. So I became everything. Mother, father, teacher, protector. I worked double shifts at the diner, cleaned houses on weekends, smiled through exhaustion just to buy her books she wanted. Every bruise on my hands felt worth it when she'd run to me, holding her school report card, shouting, "I made you proud, didn't I, Mama?" But now, years later, my proud little girl had become someone I could barely recognize. A week passed, then 2. No calls. I tried to convince myself she was just busy, work, family, life. But mothers can sense things silence tries to hide. One morning, I decided to call her. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, cheerful but trembling. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. Just wanted to hear your voice. Hope you and Emma are doing okay. I love you." The next day, nothing. The day after that, still nothing. The house started to feel heavier. Even the walls seemed to carry the weight of unanswered calls. That weekend, I went to the grocery store. I didn't need much, just milk, bread, maybe company. While walking down the aisle, I saw a little girl who looked like Emma when she was small. She had the same curious eyes, the same way of tilting her head while listening to her mother. For a brief second, I almost called out her name. When I got home, I sat by the window, holding the phone again. I thought of every bedtime story I'd told Deborah, stories about kindness, forgiveness, patience. I wondered if she'd ever tell them to Emma. Later that week, my neighbour, Mrs. Lang, stopped by. She's one of those people who knows everything that happens 3 streets away. "I saw your Deborah downtown," she said. "With that little girl, your granddaughter, right? They looked happy." Happy. That word stung, though it shouldn't have. I smiled and said, "That's wonderful," but inside, something broke quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat near the window, my hands wrapped around a cup of cold tea, eyes on the street. Every sound outside made me hope they were coming. Deborah's car pulling up, Emma's voice calling Grandma. But the only thing that came was the wind. When morning arrived, I checked my phone again. No calls, no texts, just silence. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote her a letter. "Dear Deborah," I began, "I don't know what I did wrong, but I'm sorry for it. I miss you. I miss Emma. This house doesn't feel like home without your laughter. Please, if there's still space for me in your life, call me. I promise I'll listen." I folded the letter neatly, sealed it with trembling hands, and mailed it the next day. Then I waited. 2 weeks went by. No reply, no letter, no call. Then, one evening while I was watering the plants, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped as I saw the name on the screen. Emma, my sweet granddaughter. My fingers shook as I opened the message. It wasn't a long one. "Hi, Grandma. Mom says I can't visit right now, but I love you." 12 words. Just 12. But they held everything. Affection, distance, obedience, love, and sadness. I read them over and over, tracing the screen as if my fingers could reach her through it. I typed back, "I love you too, my darling, always." Then I deleted it. Not because I didn't mean it, but because I knew she wasn't the one keeping the distance. That night, I sat in the dark, the only light coming from a candle on the table. I whispered her name, Deborah, and wondered when love had turned into something that hurt this much. I thought about calling her again, demanding answers, crying, shouting if I had to. But mothers don't fight to win. We fight to keep peace, even if it means breaking quietly. So I stayed silent, and in that silence, I started to remember every choice I'd made as a mother. Every time I said yes when I should have said no. Every time I protected her from pain when maybe she needed to face it. That's the hardest part of motherhood, realizing that sometimes the love that raised your child can be the same love that pushes her away. The next morning, I opened the window. The world outside carried on. Children laughing, cars passing, neighbours chatting, and me? I stood there, holding the phone close to my heart, whispering a prayer I wasn't sure anyone was listening to anymore. Bring her back to me. Not just to this house. Time has a strange way of revealing things you never wanted to see. At first, you think the silence is temporary, that people just get busy, that life gets complicated. But after a while, silence starts sounding like a message. And eventually, like a warning. A month had passed since I received Emma's message, and I still hadn't heard Deborah's voice. I had raised that girl with every ounce of strength I had, but now it felt like she was slipping into a world where I no longer existed. Yet the cruelest part was this: I had no idea why. I tried distracting myself with little things, dusting shelves, rearranging kitchen drawers, watering plants that didn't need watering. But chores only keep your hands busy, not your mind. My mind kept drifting to the same questions. Why wouldn't she call me back? Was she angry? Did I say something wrong the last time we talked? Or was something happening in her life that she didn't want me to know? Mothers ask themselves 1,000 questions, even when the answers hurt. One quiet afternoon, as I sat on the porch, I saw Mrs. Lang again. She was walking her dog, a little white thing that barked at the wind for no reason at all. She waved at me. "Morning, Cheryl. Lovely day, isn't it?" I forced a smile. "It is." And then she said it. "I saw your daughter yesterday. She looked stressed." She was arguing with someone at the pharmacy. My hands froze around the teacup. "Deborah?" "Yes, with the pharmacist. Something about a prescription mix-up." She sounded frustrated. "Prescription?" I didn't know Deborah was sick. Or maybe it wasn't for her, maybe for Emma, or maybe I was reading too much into things. But mothers always sense when something isn't right. Even if the clues are small, we feel the shift in the air first. After Mrs. Lang walked away, I sat there thinking for a long time, a prescription mix-up, a stressful argument, and silence from her to me. Something didn't add up. That evening, I found myself sitting near the phone again. I hated how desperate it made me feel, like I was tethered to a device waiting for someone else to decide if I mattered. But when you love someone, pride becomes a very small thing. I decided to call her once more. Ring, ring, then voicemail. I didn't leave a message this time. I hung up and stared at the empty space in front of me, feeling foolish. The truth I kept avoiding was starting to settle like dust on an untouched shelf. Something about her absence wasn't natural. A few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Not from Deborah, from the clinic where Emma used to have her checkups. The envelope was addressed to me, which was strange. I hadn't been there in years. My heart raced a little as I tore it open. Inside was a simple reminder note. "Your upcoming appointment is scheduled for next Thursday. Please bring your caregiver for verification." Caregiver? What caregiver? I stared at the letter, confused. I hadn't scheduled any appointment. I wasn't even their patient anymore. There had to be a mistake. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the letter. A woman answered politely. "Good afternoon, Family Wellness Clinic. How can I help you?" "Yes, hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I received a reminder for an appointment I didn't book. "Name, please?" "Cheryl Taylor." She typed something. A pause. Then her tone changed. Not unkind, but careful. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Taylor. Your daughter scheduled it. It's for a routine cognitive assessment." I blinked. "A what?" "A memory evaluation. She already arranged the paperwork. You're listed under assisted care." My breath caught in my throat. "Assisted care? That's not correct. I live alone. I handle everything myself." Another pause. "Your daughter is your registered caregiver. We can confirm with her if needed." My hand trembled. "No, that won't be necessary." I hung up before my voice could crack. My daughter had listed herself as my caregiver, had signed me up for memory evaluations, without telling me. I felt something cold roll through my chest, a slow dread. Not fear exactly, but the feeling you get when you realize someone you trust may be moving pieces behind you. I sat at the kitchen table, the letter in my hands, staring at it until the ink seemed to blur. The last conversation I had with Deborah kept replaying. "It's better if you don't come this week." Her voice wasn't just tired, it was calculated. But why? What was she trying to do? Was she trying to help me? Or slowly push me into a corner where she controlled every decision? The more I thought about it, the more questions bubbled up. Why didn't she want me around Emma? Why did she stop answering my calls? Why list herself as my caregiver without telling me? Why schedule a cognitive test behind my back? I hated that the idea even entered my mind, but it did. Was she planning something? That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old pipes groan and the wind brush against the windows. Memories of Deborah as a child came flooding back, her tiny hands clutching mine, her laughter when she learned to ride a bike, the tears she cried when she scraped her knee. She had always depended on me, leaned on me, trusted me. But something had changed over the years, something invisible but heavy, like an unspoken resentment growing quietly in the corners. The next morning, I decided to write everything down, not because I thought I was losing my memory, my thoughts were clearer than ever, but because I needed proof that I wasn't imagining things. I opened an old notebook and wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote, "Deborah hasn't called in 5 weeks. Clinic letter arrived under my name, but she scheduled it. Caregiver status listed without my knowledge. Prescription argument. Mrs. Langsaw, Emma messaged, but Deborah didn't and forth." When I looked at the list, my heart sank. This wasn't a mother being ignored. This was a mother being pushed aside. By noon, I decided I couldn't stay in confusion any longer. I had to know the truth. I walked down to the bus stop, my legs steady despite the heaviness inside, and headed toward the library. I needed a place to think, to breathe, to clear my mind. The librarian recognized me immediately. "Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Cheryl. Haven't seen you in a while." I smiled faintly. Just needed a quiet space. I sat at one of the wooden tables near the window and opened the notebook again. Sunlight streamed through the glass, warm and gentle. The thoughts swirling inside me were anything but gentle. I wasn't losing my memory, I wasn't confused. But Deborah was acting like I was. Why? As I sat there watching dust dance in the sunlight, a realization crept in, slow, unwelcome, and unmistakable. This wasn't distance, and it wasn't neglect, it was something else entirely. Deborah wasn't just pushing me away, she was rewriting me, turning me into someone dependent, someone forgetful, someone who needed supervision. But for what reason? What would she gain? The answer came slowly like a whisper. Control. Control over my appointments, control over my decisions, control over my access to Emma, control over my life, and beneath that disturbing possibility, an even darker one. Control over my assets. My hands tightened around the notebook. The air in the library felt suddenly thin. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think that my own daughter, the child I carried, raised, sacrificed for, could be capable of anything so cruel. But the truth doesn't need your permission. It arrives whether you're ready or not. And in that moment, sitting in that quiet library, surrounded by books and sunlight and memories of a daughter I once knew, I felt the first real wave of fear. Not fear of being alone, fear of being misunderstood, misrepresented, erased. When you start doubting someone you love, every small detail begins to carry weight. Words that once felt harmless sound different. Gestures that once meant care feel like control. You start replaying old moments, searching for signs that maybe you missed. For days, I couldn't shake the thought that Deborah had listed herself as my caregiver without telling me. That word, caregiver, echoed in my head like a threat wrapped in kindness. I told myself I needed proof before I let my heart believe something so painful, so I went looking for it. The first thing I did was call the clinic again, this time asking for my medical file. The woman on the phone hesitated. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Taylor, but your daughter's authorization restricts direct access. She has primary control of the account." I gripped the edge of the counter. "But I'm the patient." Yes, she said softly, but as your registered caregiver, she manages consent. My breath caught. I hung up before I could say anything I'd regret. That night, I didn't eat. I sat by the window watching the streetlights turn on, one by one, like tiny sentinels keeping secrets. Every sound outside felt sharper, every thought louder. I needed to see Deborah. Not talk on the phone, not text, see her face, read her eyes. So the next morning I took the bus to her house without calling first. The moment I stepped onto her porch, my heart was already racing. The air smelled like lavender and wood polish, the same as it had years ago when I used to babysit Emma here. I knocked on the door. It took a while before Deborah opened it. When she did, her face flickered between surprise and discomfort. "Mom," she said slowly, "you didn't tell me you were coming." "I know," I replied, "but I needed to see you." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Of course. Come in." The living room looked different. New furniture, new curtains, and a wall of family photos that somehow didn't include me anymore. My picture, the one that used to hang near the fireplace, was gone. I noticed it immediately, but said nothing. Emma wasn't there. "She's at school," Deborah said, as if reading my thoughts. I nodded and sat down. She offered me tea, but didn't join me. Instead, she stood near the counter, arms crossed, her expression careful. "So," she began, "what's this about?" I looked at her, and the words came out quieter than I expected. "Why did you list yourself as my caregiver?" She froze, then forced a little laugh. "Mom, that's just a formality. The clinic suggested it because of your age. It makes things easier." "Easier for who?" "For everyone," she said quickly. "For me, to schedule things, to handle emergencies. It's not a big deal." "It is when I didn't agree to it," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're overreacting. I was just trying to help." "By making medical decisions for me without my consent." Her eyes flicked up to mine, something sharp behind them. "You're making it sound sinister. It's not. You've been forgetting things lately, and I haven't been forgetting," I interrupted, voice trembling. "I remember everything, including the last time you said you'd call and didn't." Silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, "Mom, please, let's not turn this into drama. I have a lot going on." The way she said it, cold, detached, made something inside me break. There was no warmth in her tone, no recognition of the woman who had carried her through storms and sleepless nights. I wanted to shout, but instead I stood up and said quietly, "You don't have to push me out of your life to make space for your own." She didn't answer. When I left, the sound of the door closing behind me felt final. On the bus ride home, I stared out the window, watching the city blur by. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered, not weaker, just tired of carrying disappointments. When I got home, I found an envelope under my door. It wasn't mailed. Someone had slipped it in by hand. Inside was another clinic notice, this one a reminder about ongoing guardianship verification. Guardianship. I read it 3 times. My chest tightened. Guardianship wasn't caregiving, it was control, legal control. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, shaking, realizing that Deborah had gone farther than I'd imagined. She wasn't just managing appointments. She was preparing to take over everything. I pulled out my notebook and wrote again, "Guardianship verification notice received." She lied about clinic formality. Picture removed from her home. I closed the notebook and whispered to myself, "I'm not losing my mind." But part of me wondered if that was exactly what she wanted others to think. The next few days, I stayed quiet, pretending everything was normal. I didn't call, I didn't visit, I waited. If Deborah was truly trying to take control, she would make her next move soon. And she did. A week later, a woman from a home care agency showed up at my door. She smiled politely and said, "Mrs. Taylor, we're here for your wellness assessment." I told her there must be a mistake. She checked her clipboard. "Your daughter arranged this. It's standard for transition planning." Transition. The word froze me in place. Transition to what? To assisted living, ma'am. I felt my knees weaken. "I didn't agree to that." She frowned. "According to our records, your caregiver authorized the evaluation." I stood there, my voice trembling with anger. "You can tell my daughter she made a mistake. I'm not going anywhere." She looked uncomfortable, muttered an apology, and left. The moment the door closed, I locked it. My hands were shaking. My whole life, my daughter had been the one I trusted most, and now she was signing papers to take my independence away. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not because I was scared, but because I finally saw what I'd been refusing to see. Deborah didn't want to care for me. She wanted to manage me. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window until morning, watching the dawn crawl across the sky, wondering how a mother-daughter bond could twist into something like this. By sunrise, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I gathered every document I had, letters, notices, my own notes, and put them in a folder. Then I called a number I hadn't dialed in years, my old friend Arthur, a retired attorney. When he answered, his voice was slow but steady. "Cheryl, it's been a while. I need your help," I said, "and I need you to believe me." He listened carefully as I explained everything. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then he said, "You were right to call. This is not normal." He told me to bring the papers to his office the next morning. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. Not because the problem was solved, but because I finally had someone who saw me, who didn't doubt my clarity. That night, as I packed my folder, I noticed something else. A small card tucked under one of the envelopes. A business card. It wasn't from Arthur. It was from the agency woman who had come earlier. On the back, in neat handwriting, she had written, "If you don't want this, tell me quietly. You're not the first." My heart raced. She knew. She knew. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just my story. There were other mothers out there, other grandmothers, being slowly erased by the people they loved most. I turned off the lights, sat in the quiet, and whispered into the dark, "Not me. Not this time." The next morning, I left home early, folder clutched against my chest like a fragile secret. The streets were quiet, dew still clinging to the grass. I hadn't slept much, but my purpose gave me strength. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was doing something for myself. Arthur's office was in a small brick building near downtown. When I walked in, the smell of old paper and coffee greeted me like an old friend. Arthur looked older too, his hair now white, his hands slower, but his eyes were still sharp. He led me into his office, closed the door, and said, "Show me everything." I laid the folder on the desk. He opened it carefully, flipping through each page with quiet focus. The more he read, the deeper the lines on his forehead grew. After a while, he looked up. "This isn't just overreach. This isn't just overreach. This is preparation for a legal guardianship transfer. Once it's approved, you'd lose all control. Finances, even medical consent." The words felt heavy in the room. "So she could put me anywhere she wants?" "Yes, including a home, and you wouldn't be able to object." I stared at the papers in silence. "Why would she do this, Arthur?" He sighed. "Sometimes it's greed, sometimes it's guilt, sometimes people convince themselves they're helping when they're really just trying to control." He tapped the envelope marked verification notice. "Did she talk to you about this at all?" "No," I said quietly. "She just kept saying she was busy, that everything she did was for my own good." Arthur nodded slowly. "Then it's not for your good, it's for hers." I felt a wave of shame. Not because I was naive, but because a part of me still wanted to believe my daughter wasn't capable of this. Arthur helped me draft a statement revoking Deborah's authority. He said he'd file it first thing Monday. Before I left, he put his hand on mine and said, "You're doing the right thing, but be careful. When people lose control over something they've been planning, they don't always react kindly." That warning followed me all the way home. When I arrived, there was a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. It left soon after I got out. I tried to ignore it, but my gut told me it wasn't random. By evening, the phone started ringing. I didn't answer. Then came the text messages. "Mom, why are you making this hard? I was trying to help you." "You're talking to people who don't understand." I read each one, my heart aching with a mix of fear and anger. Then another message appeared, one that made my hands go cold. "Emma doesn't need to know what's going on. Let's not scare her." That's when I realized she wasn't just trying to silence me. She was trying to control the story. I put down the phone and walked to my old photo shelf. There was a picture of Emma at 5 years old, missing her front teeth, holding my hand at the park. I touched the frame and whispered, "She deserves to know the truth." 2 days later, I got my chance. It was a Sunday afternoon. The doorbell rang. When I opened it, there stood Emma, now 16, taller, more confident, but still with that spark in her eyes that reminded me of the little girl who once painted flowers on my porch. "Grandma," she said, smiling nervously, "Mom's been acting weird. Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen table, fidgeting with her phone. "She's been angry lately and secretive. I asked her why you don't come over anymore, and she just changed the subject." I took a deep breath. "Emma, there are things happening that you should probably know." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, but then I saw the same honesty in her eyes that Deborah used to have. I couldn't lie. So I told her everything. The caregiver forms, the guardianship papers, the home care agency. Every word felt like pulling thread from a wound, painful but necessary. When I finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "She told me you were getting confused, that you didn't remember things right." My chest tightened. "And you believed her?" "I didn't want to," she said, tears welling up, "but she sounded so sure." She looked down, voice breaking. "Why would she do this?" I shook my head slowly. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she thinks I'm a burden. Maybe she's scared of what caring for me might cost her." Emma covered her face with her hands. "She's not like this, Grandma. She's not supposed to be like this." I reached across the table and held her hand. "Sometimes people change, or maybe they just stop hiding who they really are." We sat there in silence for a while. Then she whispered, "What can I do?" I smiled faintly. "You already did it. You came." That evening, Deborah called, but I didn't answer. Then Emma's phone buzzed and she glanced at the screen. "It's Mom. She's coming here." My pulse quickened. "Tonight?" She nodded. By the time Deborah arrived, the sun had already set. She walked in without knocking, eyes blazing. "So this is what you're doing now? Turning my daughter against me?" Emma stood up. "Mom, stop. I just wanted to know the truth." "The truth?" Deborah laughed bitterly. "You're getting one side of it from someone who's been confused and manipulated." I stood slowly. "Confused, Deborah? I have every document you signed without my consent, every lie you told." Her voice rose. "You don't understand what you were becoming. You were forgetting things, missing payments." "I was lonely," I interrupted, "and you mistook that for weakness." The room fell silent. Then, for the first time, I saw it, the flicker of guilt behind her anger. She looked away, her voice softening. "I didn't want you to get hurt. I thought if I managed things you'd be safe." "Safe from what?" "From yourself," she whispered. Emma stepped forward. "Mom, that's not protection. That's control." Deborah's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand what it's like watching your mother fade." I walked closer, my voice trembling but firm. "You didn't watch me fade, Deborah. You pushed me into the shadows." Her lips quivered, and for a moment I thought she might finally apologize. But instead she grabbed her purse and said, "I can't do this right now." She left. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house like a final sentence. Emma turned to me, tears in her eyes. "She'll come around," she said softly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Later that night, as we sat by the window, I told her something I hadn't said out loud before. When people say time heals everything, they forget that some wounds heal crooked. They close, but they never grow back the same. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel alone. Somewhere deep down I still loved my daughter. But love isn't permission. It's hope, and hope has to be earned back. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees. For the next few days, the house was too quiet, and maybe even Emma's laughter, once bright and beginning again, turned soft, almost guilty. I could tell she wanted to ask if her mother had called again, but she didn't. She didn't have to. The silence said enough. Every creak in the hallway, every rustle of wind through the curtains, reminded me that I had crossed a line, a necessary one, but a line nonetheless. You can spend a lifetime avoiding confrontation, but when someone steals your name, your choices, your story, silence becomes a kind of death. On the third morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. It wasn't Deborah, it was Arthur. "Good morning, Cheryl," he said. "I filed the papers. You're protected now. She can't touch your assets without your consent." I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." He hesitated. "But there's something else. Deborah contacted the court this morning. She's contesting it." My hand froze on the receiver. "Contesting it?" "Yes." "She's claiming cognitive decline as her basis. Says you're unfit to manage your own affairs." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words sank like stones in water. Arthur's voice softened. We'll fight it, but she's escalating. After the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed, the world feeling strangely far away. My own daughter was trying to erase me, one form, one signature, one claim at a time. And for the first time, I understood that this wasn't about misunderstanding or concern. It was about power. That afternoon, Emma came over after school. She had that look children get when they're trying to be strong for you. "Grandma," she said, "Mom's been acting weird again. She told Aunt Marla that you're losing your mind." I smiled faintly. "Well, I suppose she'll have to find proof of that first." Emma frowned. She showed her papers, real ones. "She's desperate," I said. "When people build lies, they need others to believe them, or they start to fall apart." I watched her eyes, so much like Deborah's had once been, and added softly, "You can't hate her, Emma. Hate makes you forget who you are." She looked away, whispering, "I just don't understand how a person changes like that." I didn't have an answer. Some people change because of fear, others because of greed, and some because they confuse love with ownership. Deborah's reasons were somewhere tangled between them. Later that evening, I sat down at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. If she wanted to rewrite my story, I would write my own first. I began with the truth. My name is Cheryl Taylor. I am 72 years old. I am not losing my memory, and I will not lose my dignity. I wrote about my marriage, about raising Deborah alone after her father passed, about the nights I worked 2 jobs just to keep her in school. I wrote about every sacrifice I had made quietly, never asking for gratitude, only hoping that one day she would remember how much she was loved. When I was done, the pages were filled with my life. Not just memories, but proof of who I was. Proof that I was still here. 2 days later, Arthur called again. "There's a hearing scheduled next week," he said. "She'll be there." My heart trembled, and so will I. The night before the hearing, Emma stayed over. We made tea, and I told her stories from when Deborah was little. How she used to sneak into my bed during thunderstorms, how she would sing to stray cats outside the porch. Emma laughed softly. "It's hard to imagine Mom like that." "She was light once," I said, "before the world taught her to measure love in control." When morning came, I dressed carefully, not to impress the court, but to remind myself of who I was, a woman who had survived too much to be dismissed by her own child. Emma walked beside me, her small hands steady in mine. The courthouse smelled like cold air and old paper. Deborah was already there, sitting beside a lawyer I didn't recognize. She didn't look at me when I entered. She just adjusted her jacket, pretending to read something. When the judge began, her lawyer spoke first. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client has acted solely out of concern. She believes her mother's recent confusion and paranoia are symptoms of cognitive decline." Paranoia. That word burned. When it was my turn, Arthur stood. "Your Honor, we've evidence to the contrary. Financial records, written correspondence, medical evaluations, all confirming Mrs. Taylor's full mental capacity." Then he handed over the documents I had signed, the ones I wrote myself, in my own handwriting. My story, my life. The judge skimmed through the pages, his brow furrowing slightly. "Mrs. Taylor," he said gently, "is there anything you wish to say?" I stood, hands trembling only slightly. "Your Honor," I said, "when a parent grows old, it's natural for their children to worry, but concern becomes cruelty when it's used as a tool. I may forget a few dates, I may move a little slower, but that doesn't make me invisible. I am still here, and I still remember what love used to look like before it started looking like paperwork." A quiet fell over the courtroom. Even Deborah wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Taylor." The hearing ended quickly after that. The court dismissed Deborah's petition. Guardianship was denied. My independence was officially restored. Outside, the air was bright and cold. Emma hugged me tightly. "You did it, Grandma." I smiled, though the victory felt bittersweet. We did it. Deborah stood a few steps away, looking small in a way I had never seen her before. When our eyes met, I expected anger, maybe shame, but what I saw instead was something closer to fear. She walked toward me, voice barely steady. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I looked at her for a long time before answering. "But you did." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought I was protecting you." "No," I said quietly. "You were protecting the version of me that made you feel needed." She covered her face, sobbing. For a moment, I almost reached out to her. Almost. But some distances can't be crossed until the person on the other side truly wants to meet you halfway. Emma watched, tears running down her own cheeks. "What happens now?" she whispered. I looked up at the sky, pale and endless. "Now," I said, "we start over, but maybe not together." And that was the truth of it. Because love, no matter how deep, cannot survive without respect. And forgiveness is not the same as permission. That night, I went home alone. I brewed a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the moon rise over the hills. The world was quiet again, but this time the quiet felt earned. Peaceful, not hollow. I opened my notebook to the last page and wrote, "Sometimes the people you raise will try to rewrite your story. But as long as you can still hold a pen, truths, the ending never quite erases them." It's been 3 months since the hearing, and the house feels both quieter and lighter. The fear that once lingered in corners has faded, replaced by something gentler. Acceptance, maybe. Or something close to it. Deborah hasn't come by since that day. She sends short messages now and then, simple ones like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Emma says hi." I reply politely, nothing more. There's no anger in me anymore, but there's no space for blind forgiveness either. I've learned that peace doesn't always come from reunion. Sometimes it comes from release. Emma visits every week. She brings flowers from the market, always the same ones, yellow tulips, because she says they remind her of hope. We talk about her school, her friends, her plans to study journalism, and sometimes when the conversation drifts, she asks about the past. "Do you ever miss her, Grandma?" she asked last Sunday. I smiled. You can't miss someone who never really leaves your heart. You just learn to live with the echo. She nodded, not fully understanding, but maybe one day she will. In the evenings, I sit by the window with my tea and my notebook. It's become my ritual, a way to talk to the parts of myself I used to hide. I write letters I never send, to Deborah, to my younger self, even to Emma's future. Words, I've realised, can hold things that conversations sometimes can't. The first letter I wrote was to Deborah. I didn't plan to show it to anyone, but if she ever finds it one day, I hope it tells her what I couldn't say out loud. It began like this. "Dear Deborah, I've tried to understand the kind of love that makes a daughter want to control her mother's life. Maybe it isn't hatred. Maybe it's fear. Fear of losing me, fear of growing older, fear of seeing your reflection in my wrinkles. But love should never look like ownership. You can't protect someone by taking away their choices. You can't honour them by silencing their voice. The woman you tried to manage is the same one who raised you to stand on your own. How quickly we forget the roots once we start building our own branches. If one day you wake up and realise how far apart we've drifted, I want you to remember something. I never stopped loving you. I just stopped letting your version of love hurt me. Mom." I closed the letter after writing that line. It didn't need more words. Sometimes the hardest part of love is learning when to stop speaking. The next letter I wrote was for Emma. I wanted her to carry something of me that wasn't just a story told in whispers. "My sweet Emma, you're growing up in a world that confuses control with care. Remember this, real love gives you room to breathe, to choose, to fall, and to rise again. Never let anyone make you smaller, not even those who claim it's for your safety. You come from a line of women who learn to survive storms. But survival isn't the goal anymore, my darling. Peace is. Build your peace like a garden, water it with kindness, protect it with truth, and never hand the gate keys to someone who doesn't respect the soil you've tended. When you tell my stories one day, tell them softly. Tell them not as warnings, but as reminders that love without freedom is just another kind of cage. Grandma." When I finished, I placed the letters in a small wooden box beside my bed. Maybe someday, when I'm gone, Emma will find them. Maybe she'll understand why I chose silence over revenge, calm over chaos. Life, I've learned, isn't about winning battles. It's about choosing which ones deserve your heart. The seasons have started to change again. The trees outside are blooming, and the air smells like rain and beginnings. I walk to the porch each morning, sit in the old rocking chair, and let the sun warm my face. Sometimes I talk to myself. Sometimes I talk to the wind. It doesn't matter who listens. What matters is that I'm still speaking. A few days ago, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Deborah. For a moment, my heart stopped. I held it for hours before I opened it, afraid of what might be inside. It wasn't long, just a few lines written in shaky ink. Mom, I read your statement from court again. You were right. I was trying to protect you from something that wasn't real, and in the process, I became the thing you needed protection from. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness, but I hope one day I can earn it. Love, Deborah. I sat there a long time, reading the letter over and over. Then, quietly, I placed it inside the same box that held mine. Not as proof of reconciliation, but as proof of understanding. The kind that doesn't erase the past, but honors the pain that shaped it. That night, I dreamed of her, not as the woman who betrayed me, but as the little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. In the dream, she whispered, "I'm sorry," and for the first time, I believed she meant it. When I woke up, I didn't cry. I just smiled. Some stories don't need perfect endings. They just need peace. I poured myself a cup of tea, went to the porch, and watched the sunrise. The world felt new again, and I realized something simple, something I wish I'd understood sooner. Forgiveness isn't about fixing the person who hurt you. It's about freeing yourself from the version of you that kept waiting for an apology. That morning, I closed my eyes and whispered, "I forgive you, Deborah. Not because you asked, but because I'm finally ready to stop carrying the weight." The wind picked up, soft and warm, brushing my hair back as if someone unseen had heard me. Inside, the clock ticked quietly. The kettle hummed. The day began like any other, but it felt different, lighter, brighter, whole. And in that stillness, I understood the truest thing I'd ever known. You can lose people, homes, years, even yourself for a while. But as long as you can tell your story, you are never truly gone. Because stories, especially the ones told with love, keep us alive long after silence tries to take our place.